Well, I thought to get started, we could just do a brief set of introductions with our fantastic panelists here. So I'm going to turn it over to Molly quickly.
Hi, good morning. I'm Molly Peck, and when I was invited to speak on this panel, I was the Director of Advertising and Sales Promotion at Cadillac. As of 2 weeks ago, I'm now Director of Advertising and Sales Promotion at Chevrolet. I've been in the auto industry for about 20 years, both in marketing and advertising positions.
Hi, I'm Ian Schafer. I'm the founder and CEO of digital agency Deep Focus.
Hi, I'm Shiv Singh. I'm the global head of digital for PepsiCo Beverages.
Hi, I'm Calle, the Chief Creative Officer of Ogilvy in New York.
Terrific. Well, the topic is what is advertising? And there's no doubt that the media and marketing ecosystem has been going through a lot of dramatic change. It's become a lot more dynamic, it's become a lot more Darwinian, and it's certainly become a lot more digital. And I thought to get us started, Shiv, perhaps we could talk about how these developments have impacted how advertisers, media companies, and agencies actually define advertising, and whether, from your point of view, you think these definitions are actually converging or actually diverging.
You know, it's interesting. So I spent a lot of time on the agency side before moving over to PepsiCo, and one of the first things I discovered when I joined PepsiCo was the way we define advertising is a little different to the way many agencies and many media companies define and think about advertising. And it's interesting because it's not like one definition's more right than the other, but what it goes to is our objectives aren't always aligned with each other. You know, that same old issue, I would say, has grown a lot more significantly. And the differences in the definition of advertising translate into what we think our consumers and our customers value versus what our agencies may think they value versus what a media company that's trying to sell us advertising may think they value. And it's all starting to come to a head in interesting ways. But I definitely feel we have different definitions because we have different objectives, and it sometimes gets translated into advertising and communication strategies that seem a little dysfunctional. Yeah.
Can you share a bit around how you're defining advertising at Pepsi today?
So I'm one voice in a large organization of many incredibly talented marketers. But what I'd say is that advertising is a means to an end, which is to drive brand health and volume for our business. It's as simple as that. And it's one of the levers we have, and how we bring it to life may vary. The interesting thing is, where I feel we have a challenge, is a lot of our partners, or some of our partners, may not use that same measure to define advertising. And where we fall short is we don't do a good enough job of sharing those measures and explaining to them what we see as moving to support them.
Yeah, Ian, I want to bring you in. But there's so much choice for marketers today, and there's so much fragmentation. And in many ways, there's never been as much clutter as there is out there. When you're talking to brands, and they're facing so much complexity, and we're increasingly in an era where it's all about getting into the status update more than anything else. How do you think about driving scale when you're thinking about engaging with users? And how do you think about that in digital versus traditional media?
Sure. Well, I mean, the traditional digital way of achieving scale is by buying more ads, and which gets us into the clutter problem. Ironically, as the world of publishing content has moved into basically content kind of flowing through all these platforms, the notion of clutter changes. So, we used to be competing with other ads on the page, sometimes even the content, and ad blockers. Excuse me. But now we're also competing with, Instagram photos of our friends' babies, who's dating whom, things like that. So, we're competing for attention, which, by the way, we can make we can make more impressions to sell. You can't make any more attention. There's just only a limited amount of it. So from a clutter perspective, we're dealing with that. And when we talk to brands about advertising, we have to remind them that their competition isn't just the other people in their vertical. I mean, it's people. It's the people that are friends with the people that they're speaking to. So the notion of feed advertising in the feed, some platforms are actually providing that as a native solution, obviously, and you can buy your way in some ways into a feed. But the best kind of reach that we can get and the kind of reach that we strive for, and frankly the kind of reach that we evaluate ourselves against, is the reach that we can achieve through people and treating them with the respect of a media, a publisher, than just the media that we or the content that we throw at people. So engagement through or reach through engagement is possible, but you have to start. You have to start, ironically, with scale to begin with. That's why when you're talking about social, like acquisition is still kind of an important thing. But again, it's what you do with that.
Right. Calle, it seems that brands for a long time were defined by creative messaging that was really aspirational or emotional. Now it seems like tables are turned, and brands in many ways are defined by what consumers think, whether it's ratings or reviews or comments, or by how they act, or Jeff mentioned at the beginning, by the kind of relationship they want to have. And just you can think about maybe driving branded entertainment, or you can maybe even think about creating a service. How do you think about creative today?
Yeah, it's especially in a place like Ogilvy, who has everything under the sun that you can want from communication. But I try to define it these days more as brand stories that people want to participate in voluntarily, because advertising used to be so much of what a company says, and then there's a receiver on the other end. And now that we can sort of make sure that we don't receive things we don't want to anymore, you have to create something that people want to participate in voluntarily. And to me, it could be something that's digital that I participate in also, but it can just as be as I watch something that I'm really, really interested in. And to me, when you create something where people want to participate in, you need to be on the consumer's side rather than on the brand side. And it's trying to create a fusion there that makes people, find anything interesting. But it also comes down to you have to tell, a brand story that's a long-term thing, that's at the heart of what the brand is about. And you have to, every time you have to start defining you have to define what the brand is and how do that manifest itself out in the world. That, I think, will never change, regardless of the media. But then it's more like, are we good enough to create the things that ends up in the media spaces? And I see that more as a little bit of a generational shift that's going to be like 5 years in the making. And so when I see books today going to like Miami Ad School and the likes, they make their own little films. They do things everywhere without any effort whatsoever. So I think we're all going to be fine.
Yeah, I think people are very okay with brands. Like, we don't have to be like so subtle where we don't have to talk about brands in order to get people to pay attention to brands. I think the stories, though, that the brands tell have to be as interesting, or I guess maybe the brands that the stories that the brands are, maybe have to be more interesting than the stories that they're telling. People are generally can find brands interesting. A lot of brands that have developed personalities over time that are part of their culture, that comes through in all of their advertising. And the reason why we keep using the same examples is because they're marks of excellence. I mean, Pepsi does it, Red Bull, right? Nike, they're cliche, but it's because they've committed to doing this and committed to making their organizations about those particular stories. Right. So the ones that they tell through digital and creative simply support, the story of the company itself.
Great. I think that's a great segue to Molly. And you led a very innovative approach for General Motors with the Cadillac ATS launch this summer. A very content-intensive campaign for a new product. Can you talk about how that was related to a different way of looking at advertising and maybe approaching the user very differently?
Yeah, for certain. That campaign, is we approach it quite differently than any campaign we've ever done before, in that we approached it as a content package. We went and we bid it out to production companies, not as a series of 30-second ads or print or digital. we said, this is what we're trying to achieve, and we want you to partner with us in helping us tell the story. And first and foremost, we want people to feel something, which is back to your question about the information. Of course, they're going to, especially when buying a vehicle, want to know a lot about it, but we want them to feel something. And so we ended up partnering with at Radical. They were phenomenal, and we built the elements of that story. So that included digital video, it included broadcast video, it included print, it included all the elements that we would go to market as a holistic campaign in talking to the customer.
That's great. Ian, I want to ask you a question about what kind of capabilities agencies need today. Seems like more and more we hear, Molly describe what she's doing with Cadillac. So much more of the advertising needs to be shorter, more social, more iterative, more real time. How does that change how you need to operate as an agency?
Yeah, well, I mean, being iterative is something that we've been since the beginning. I think it's the only way we've been able to. We were independent for a while, and it was the only way that we could have stayed that way is by staying ahead of a lot of things. And the only way to stay ahead of a lot of things is being able to borrow like a software development term, is being agile, literally as a process, not just as a quality. And so, from an agency standpoint, look, I think the agencies that are going to thrive in the near future and even the present are the ones that are as agile as possible, which means they have to have kind of a generalist point of view and should be able to lead strategy. And something that Jeff said earlier on rings very true. It's being able to look at a brand from the consumer out as opposed to figure out how to constantly translate that brand to the consumer. There's a role for that too. And I think, just as I think there's a role for several agencies in a brand's roster per se, but we always strive to be the ones that do lead. And we do lead, again, because we tend to understand the thought process of the consumer and the way they actually consume content, not the way we want them to. And that's, for us, that's been the hallmark, I guess, of our success, and it keeps us operating in real time, which means we've had to completely rethink, over the last several years, the operations of the agency and figure out a way to not only make what we do better, but actually affordable. Because it's easy to apply but a classic talent model to a new situation. And I think that's what we always try to do is retrofit. And the right thing to do is actually rethink. And so, we've rethought a nice chunk of our creative process. I wrote a piece about it in Ad Age a couple weeks ago. That's important for us. And, the way to make that creative process turn out maybe 10 times as more content, but make it, just as if not more affordable than it was before, takes a lot of work. And that work, you have to be willing to put that in. The challenge is, and my favorite Clay Shirky quote, institutions tend to preserve the problems that they're the solution for. And so we kind of have to throw that to the curb and look at new challenges with new solutions and not try to keep something going that's been going for the last 75 years.
Question either for Calle or Shiv. When you look at all the different choices that you have, both in terms of partners and platforms, where do your ideas actually come from? Is it the domain of the creative agency? Are you looking to startups? Are you looking to your media partners?
Yeah, to me, it's the more diverse group you can get together in the beginning of the process. And we're lucky enough to have like a whole building of different, we have social, we have PR, advertising, direct. We can get a whole group of interesting people in a room and try to tackle a problem. Because thinking of a brand problem today, you have to solve it in so many avenues. So the concept needs to be high enough to work in every media, but then it also needs to be thought of by the people who are specialists in the different categories. See, will this actually be really good in my media? Because you can also come up with an idea. I've yet to see an idea that works fantastic in every media. That just doesn't exist. Any idea has a skew somewhere. It either has a little bit of a skew towards storytelling or it's a little bit skewed towards participation. And that's fine. It depends on what the goal, what you want to communicate. But the more smart, diverse people you can get in a room, and everyone needs to work together. That's, to me, the only way to work.
You know, I would build on that. I think, firstly, totally diversity is everything, and you know, one sort of step change activity that we launched is our PepsiCo Digital Labs program, which, you know, basically puts us in the offices of startups for a while, and we learn an immense amount from there. But, you know, the other thing I would say when I think about, you know, some of our more recent, really successful marketing programs and campaigns is I feel in our business we sometimes put, and this is going to sound absurd, but I feel we sometimes put too much weight on the idea and not enough on the execution. An example of that is, so this summer we ran a series of premium concerts. One was with Nicki Minaj, another one was with Katy Perry, the third was with Gloriana, the band. Concerts in and of themselves aren't special by any means. But what made these special, it was all in the execution. These were Twitter live-streamed concerts where consumers via Twitter were able to influence the concert in some form. And what we saw was that, you know, within like that 90-minute window, we had hundreds of thousands of people watch it. And then over video on demand over the next 3 weeks, you know, we'd get into several million. And it led to the question, really, to bring it back full circle, is what is advertising? Is it a 30-second TV spot that gets a guaranteed amount of reach that you pay a certain amount for? Or is it a live event you suddenly make available to tens of millions of people? That's not 30 seconds, it's 90 minutes. People flow in, they flow out. And you're sort of blowing up the internet. We had 7 out of 10 organic trending topics on Twitter with our Nicki Minaj concert. So it leads to what is advertising? And then where did that idea really come from? The core of the idea wasn't that special. It was in how we chose to execute it.
Yeah, I think on the choose to execute, I think there's also these days, you know, in advertising we're used to this kind of cannonball approach with the client. We're sitting and noodling around with the idea, and then boom, we shoot it off into the market and we see what happens. And stealing from Matthias, formerly at Farfar, now McCann, this is his quote, is I think nowadays marketing is more like a pinball machine. You get your idea out there and then you work with trying to bounce it as many times as you possibly can around. And that actually means taking a leap with the client to actually change and course correct your idea in real time in the market. And I think that's way more how campaigns will play out in the future, because that's where you get your value, when there becomes like a conversation with the marketplace and you get it to bounce as many times as possible.
So Molly, how do you see, given the experience you had this past summer and others you've had, brand and advertising strategy and planning changing from the perspective of the marketer? How do you see things that you can still plan ahead for, and how do you maintain sort of the flexibility, you know, Ian's word, agility, to move more in real time with how the user is engaging with your content?
Well, I think what these guys are saying is that, you know, the definition of advertising is changing. And of course, we can think of the classic definition. But really, we need to think of, you know, we all hear all the buzz about content providers, but that's a lot of it. And it's really however we interface with the consumer, especially in a paid fashion. And it's interfacing with them on where they're comfortable receiving our message and where it's welcome and of value, and to the point that we can provide it and build value so that they actually desire that content, whether it's in the form of a 30-second ad or a concert or, you know, branded entertainment, whatever it is, that we have to think of ourselves as producers of that. It's pretty exciting, I think, because I think it opens up the possibilities quite a bit to what we do, but it also requires us to, you know, anybody who wants to just produce print ads or television ads, there's not, that's becoming a niche, and it's not going to lead to the greatest effectiveness.
Yeah. Well, it seems in many ways TV is now almost a teaser for what happens elsewhere.
I mean, it's so, I mean, it's hard to tell a story in 30 seconds. It's much better. I mean, maybe the idea requires 47 seconds.
Right. Shiv, it looked like you wanted to get on.
Yes, sorry. So I think this reminds me of something that I think is worth us thinking about. I think if there's one skill set that I think is going to matter an immense amount for an agency in the future, and does even today, is really having a very strong sensibility on what's happening in culture, whether that's pop culture or other streams of culture, and then knowing how brands and marketers should act upon it. And I'd say credit to, so we work with Deep Focus, and credit to Ian and his team along with OMD and Facebook. For example, in the last 2 months, we ran this Facebook Intense program where it was all about participating in real time in pop culture in some big ways, but in some small ways. And they all came together, supporting us to do it in a way that actually led to us having the highest engagement rates, the highest reach of any CPG advertiser during that period. And it was all about having that pulse on culture, but then being able to marry that with what the brand is doing and what our consumers want. And you have to make all those three pieces work together.
And what's interesting about that particular effort is that when you look at engaging that kind of audience at a certain scale, and by the way, the scale, there are several CPGs with scale technically in terms of like number of likes on Facebook, like bigger than Pepsi. But the fact of the matter is we're able to talk because of the engagement to so many people that it makes you kind of rethink the attribution model. Because historically you want to think about attribution model, and did I'm sorry, this is a GM thing, but like, did somebody buy a car because of that, right? Like you can't necessarily, especially with the new era of advertising where you have to be behaving as opposed to just flighting ads. That is, it's not always attributable. There's no longer a solid line to be drawn from every action to a reaction. In being consistent with messaging and the messaging that we know people are going to respond to, and optimizing more towards not just what the message was, but to the reaction people were going to have to it, which was sharing in many cases, we're able to have a far better reach and certainly more efficient reach than any other medium during that time period for Pepsi. And that's a big deal. When you're talking about attribution, what's the ROI? Well, how's this? It's the most efficient ad medium we have. So
I would take that measurement even a step further and say, of course, we want to know how many people came to our website and what kind of actions it drove in search and that our campaign did. But when we launched the ATS and opening games of Olympics, one of the other things we measured is just cultural buzz. And we looked at things like becoming Esquire Car of the Year. That was important. But one of the things that tickled us the most was becoming the answer on a New York Times crossword puzzle. That's so looking at other barometers of are we getting success is maybe a little less quantifiable, but still very important to be able to see if we're becoming part of that conversation.
Yeah. Well, there's clearly lots of potential for using data for insight and also for measuring effectiveness. And I'm curious, Calle, is there a tension between the push towards more data and analytics and still allowing enough room for creativity? Can they actually enhance creativity?
Yeah, it depends on where you apply it and how to use it. For us, it's more when you do strategy and research, you can find lots of interesting things in data, especially sales data. Why do people buy things in different periods? And try to combine just the raw data with actually talking to consumers. I think just looking at data, it can also be dangerous because you can draw conclusions from that not necessarily be true. So combining emotions with data, I think is the best move forward, because that's it's the emotions that generates data in the first place. You can't have any data without people reacting to something. So combining those things, that's usually what gives us the best fodder for moving things forward, especially when it comes to reactions in social media and the like, when you can have real-time information about how people are reacting to your creative and to the pinball thing, setting it off towards new goals.
it's also tough because that data that we're collecting has such a short shelf life or half-life because we're essentially renting it from a lot of the providers that we're using it from. There's not everyone that we touch on a daily basis is not getting plopped into our CRM program somewhere. So where we can measure lifetime value of every connection that we make. So that's an additional challenge that we have to deal with, which is maybe a rightful one because of privacy issues.
Right. So I guess question leads me to ask if the focus is on building more and more relationships, maybe building more and more digital experiences. That seems to lead to different types of measurement, different types of approaches that really adequately assess and evaluate what that really means. Shiv, are you using any new approaches to metrics? Are you combining metrics? How are you getting a real read on what works right now?
Yeah, all of the above, and it's not easy by any means. And I think a perfect example is, in the spring for our brand Brisk, we launched a mobile app. It was a game. It got 2 million downloads. Average playing time on the game was 17 minutes. And when it was done, we loved it. And then we paused and said, wait a minute. Now, how does that compare to a 30-second spot that reached 5 million people 5 times over the same time period? What's going to move the brand needle a lot more? So brand new questions, no doubt about it. What we're seeing, though, is you just can't bet against social data. It's as simple as that. So, for example, the MTV VMA Awards were a few weeks ago. We're a big partner of theirs. We uncovered some amazing statistics that I'm surprised haven't sort of hit the press that strongly. Statistics that are, for example, 6 million people watched the MTV VMAs, but something like 3 million people talked about it online. That changes dramatically how one should advertise and market around it. We're pulling that data in. We're seeing how our brands did in social media that night, and we're forming new hypotheses around it. So yes, absolutely. And it all starts with social data.
Terrific. Well, let's take a few questions from the audience.
Okay, if anyone has a question, just raise your hand. We'll get a microphone to you. We have one question that came in by text message to anyone in particular, it doesn't say. How do you see augmented reality disrupting media?
You mean like literally holding up a phone to a physical object and having it show up like additional data, or like Google Glasses?
Yeah, it's
I
actually
assume that's
not
what.
my question, really. It's somebody else's question.
I mean, in the year 2000, we'll all have Google Glasses, and we'll all be seeing things that aren't there and powered by data that's all around. I think it's something that's that we're all thinking about in terms of like how can data improve, how can like digital data improve our physical lives. I think focusing on the bright shiny object of like augmented reality apps is probably not the right way to do it necessarily, unless it's a piece of technology that can provide direct product or brand benefit.
I don't think it's going to disrupt media, certainly in the next 12 months, and unlikely in the next 24 months.
Right. It always takes some things longer to hit than you think. That's what I've learned.
Any other questions? Just raise your hand. Coming.
If you wouldn't mind standing and mentioning your name and company, that would be great too. Thank you.
Sure. My name is Paul Levine, and I have a company called Slightly Mad Communications. It's a boutique ad agency. I was just curious, this is a question for the marketers. Given the advent of the digital revolution, to what extent do somewhat traditional agencies play a bigger role or a lesser role in your informing your marketing mix and strategy?
So, I mean, I would say from our perspective, this digital avalanche is new to everyone. It's, in some respects, I'd say a lot of it is also new to the digital agencies, what's happening today. And I spent 14 years on the agency side, and those years were very different to what's happening now. I think it's anyone's game, and I think as soon as we call an agency a traditional agency at some level, we're sort of insulting them a little bit. So we try not to look at it from that lens. There's no doubt, though, some agencies have a better grasp on brand strategy and platform-agnostic creative ideas than others. And then there are other agencies who have a much deeper sense of consumer insights, or executions in specific channels. It's a journey everyone's on.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I think I want to thank our four great panelists here for a really lively discussion. And I think we'll just take a quick break right now.
Yes, if anyone has any more questions, we're going to ask the panelists to step over to the side because sometimes people like to have private questions that they don't hear public. And I'm going to give you details about the break while that's happening. Good job.